character is one of the first characters, to be introduced as an actual person and as an actual character, because at the beginning we just have a bunch of tourists, and then George comes on and he basically brings Fred into the RBS. He's the chief executive of the RBS at the start, and he brings Fred in as his deputy, and then he eventually steps down and becomes chairman.
We first meet Shriti at the devolution ceremony. She's come up with Gordon Brown to the opening, and actually after that we don't really see her until Act 2 when things start to fall apart. So yeah, she works with Gordon in the Treasury, and she is one of his advisors in government at the time.
If you're playing a real person, then there's I think a lot of research that you should do, you owe it to the person. So this was very much a lot of research. Watched a lot of footage. There's quite a few documentaries about the RBS crash. Watched them. There's a lot of footage of George Mathewson being interviewed on various subjects. He was very pro Scottish independence. So I watched a lot of that. And then there's a couple of books, which one called Shattered particularly, which is his tome about that size. It goes into the whole thing in a lot of detail, so I read some of that. I read the relevant parts. So that's the real aspect of him. But then we're not playing real people, really. We're playing these versions. And also in this play, we're not even playing versions of them. We're playing the Furies, the sort of Greek chorus. So we're playing the Furies versions of these people. So it's another remove. So that was playing, I think, more kind of archetypes in some ways.
I think so. I think that's fair to say for sure.
So I started to think about that, and then when I'd done quite a lot of reading on George, there was a few things that kept on popping out of how arrogant and how brusque he was and abrupt. And that made me think about some David Mamet plays, like Glengarry Glen Ross, and the office politics of that, and the kind of macho office politics, and also those kind of levels of where people are talking but they're not saying what they mean at all. So those are the things that I kind of brought to it.
I'm fairly fresh out of drama school, so this is really my first ever big job, and I have a tendency to make things far too academic. So for me, it was kind of like, as Callum says, doing all the research on the person and just kind of getting information on how they walk, how do they speak, do they have any specific, tics or mannerisms or anything like that, watching the clips. I actually spoke to Shriti as part of the process because Shriti's been involved with some of the kind of earlier conversations of the show. And I went to Andrew and I went, why don't I just talk to her? So I've had a few catch-ups with her actually. So I got a lot of information from that, speaking to her and how she addresses things and how she tends to communicate. So that was actually probably the most helpful for me than for me personally, because there's actually not a huge amount on her in terms of clips and things like that. So it was great to be able to go straight to the person and have a fantastic chat about where she was when things happened, how she felt about things, what her relationships were to people like Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown, and her interactions with Fred Goodwin, even interactions with, the government in America and things like that. So I got a lot of kind of meat from that, and kind of like Callum was saying, do all of that stuff, and then you kind of just go. So a lot of that happens in the room. I wouldn't say it was necessarily before. I don't know, It's kind of more of you then have to find it here. And as you're saying, because we play the Greek chorus and the Furies, it's sort of, you have to access our characters via them and their perspective of what they're trying to achieve in the story. Because we're playing a version of them, and we're never going to be that person, right? So it's kind of like, you then have to bring it back down, for me, to the scene and what you're trying to do in that scene, and just drawing on all of those nice little things you've acquired. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. Sometimes there is a real responsibility. A few years ago I did a play called Glasgow Girls, and I was playing the real life teacher, and I got to know him really well, and everything was run by him. Every script change was run by him, and he would say I really don't want to be represented like that at this point, you know. So he was still a teacher, you know, he was still a working teacher, so there was an enormous responsibility to do right by him, you know. Of course, you are representing a real person with real feelings, and you have to do your best. Again, like I said, we're talking archetypal figures in a way. So for me, it was, getting that bank of stuff, and then just a couple of things, a couple of hooks, which is, I think, it's something that I do whenever I play multiple characters. It's good to have just one hook. This guy stands like this. This guy does this thing. This guy blinks a lot. You know, you just, something that you can just go straight into, and that establishes the character for you in your mind, you know. Responsibility to them. It's a tough one in this
It is a tough one,
you know?
because it's such a disaster. Every single person is culpable in this play for contributing. So, like with my conversation with Shriti, I remember coming away from it and being like, actually, I went to James and I was like, here's all my notes I took from this conversation. Actually, we've got a couple of inaccuracies just of information that she's clarified for us, like her position and bits of dialogue and stuff like that on her specific journey. And James went, fantastic, give me that. And then we just rejig stuff in the story. So then that kind of did that. In a way, it's like if this person is a figure in history,
they're fair game in some ways.
A little bit. And we can be as respectful as we can by doing honour to it. And then we kind of let the audience decide what they think about it.
Ultimately, we are telling a cautionary tale about people who behaved very badly. You know, and harmed a lot of people, you know.
And it's a story about hubris and a fall from grace.
Arrogance,
and power and that corruption. So, we can take all that information, like I said, put it to the audience and go, you decide.
Initially, there was an ambiguity about who they were, and there was a real kind of thing James had about them being the real people, about being the actual victims of the RBS crash, and that's what we would be at the end when we took our costumes off. But ultimately, there was no way to make that read.
Yes.
You know, other than saying, "Oh, we're the real people," you know.
Yes.
It didn't actually read as an image, you know. So that kind of had to go by the wayside.
Yes.
But that kind of continued for quite a long time, didn't it?
It did. And we tried so many different ways of making that work. And as Karen says, by the end, it was sort of proving to be another storyline that was distracting us from just getting to the ending and getting to the point. So that went quite quickly.
And then we went back to the thing which is in the very beginning of the play, where Kirsty says, these are the Furies, instruments of justice and vengeance. And we kind of went, okay, that's what they are then. You know, you tell the audience that at the start, you might as well just deliver on that, you know?
Exactly. Keep it simple, keep it easy for us. And actually a lot of the things like the lighting and the staging really leans into that. So again, coming back to it being a cautionary tale, it kind of went, that makes sense. And we don't need to then like over egg anything or like really be like, look at what we're doing. It's very obvious that we're sort of like pushing him.
Instruments of justice.
Yeah,
there was that thing. I remember there was that whole other thing of like that we were maybe trying to get him to to replay the events in order to reach a different outcome. Maybe this time he'll get it right. Maybe we'll try it over and over again. And again, we couldn't get that to read to an audience at all.
It was just complicated, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really complicated.
And without us engaging with the audience directly, that kind of made it really difficult.
Yeah, we couldn't really play that, you know, or show it.
No.
So unless we'd had a Greek.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Let us now watch Fred and see if this time he gets it right. You know, we would have had to have done something as, you know, as crass as that.
Yes.
So, we just straightforward instruments of vengeance, which is, you know, quite satisfying to play.
Yeah, it's very satisfying, yes.
Well, mine's obviously with Fred, you know, and Sandy and I have talked about this a little bit as a kind of father figure, even though he wasn't much older than him. George didn't have traditional banking qualifications in the same way that Fred didn't, you know, and Fred had a very fractious relationship with his father, which I think is echoed throughout the play with the Adam Smith as well, you know. But George and Fred, and I interact with Gordon Brown at some point, but there's nothing much more for George.
Shriti's, I think, main relationship is with Gordon Brown. And we see her in the play kind of being an anchor to him, both at the start where she appears in the devolution, and then when we see her later is at Downing Street. And it's very much her, she's brought in to fix the problem. And he relies on her very heavily. And they have this wonderful scene together where Gordon, he's just had enough of it, and he just kind of loses it a bit, and she has to bring him back down to earth. And I think that was very true of their real life relationship, especially from what Shriti has said to me. That's her focus, of kind of making sure he's able to do what he's doing, and she supports him the best way that she can. She has a bit of a relationship with Alistair Darling. It's not a great one. They didn't really get on in real life. Polite, political, wonderful, but I think they clashed quite a lot because of where their position to Gordon and their relationships to Gordon. But yeah, she was very much kind of focused on Gordon, focused on kind of supporting him, and then when he brings her back in, like sorting out the mess that all these men have made and having to go and like fix the problem.
For George, it was when the NatWest takeover happened. He had attempted a few takeovers before he brought Fred in, and they hadn't really worked, and George became very cautious about that, thinking that if they fail another takeover, then they could get taken over themselves. You know? So that's kind of why he brought Fred in. He brought Fred in as his kind of attack dog, really, you know, to do the dirty work that he had lost the nerve for, you know. So I think the NatWest takeover is a huge moment for him, you know, the building of the new headquarters. There's a whole thing in the play about John Lewis not, you know, giving them the space to build the St James Centre, but that wasn't ever Fred's agenda. Actually, that was George's idea. It was George who wanted to build behind St Andrew's Square and knock down St James Centre and all that. Fred was never that bothered about that. Fred always wanted to be near the airport. That was always his kind of agenda. So I think that's another step up, you know, and that point at which it's revealed that the RBS were at that point bigger than Coca-Cola, Apple and Sony combined, which is an insane thing. And then, of course, he gets ousted as chairman, you know.
Yeah, that's quite big. That's quite big, isn't it, for him?
So I think those three moments are where it turns for him. You know?
I think for Shriti, it's not until the second act where we're in Downing Street and stuff is starting to go wrong. I think the turning moment for her, before then we kind of just introduce her enjoying herself, having a nice time. I think it's that moment where Gordon goes, "You're onto something, go and figure it out, off you go." That's when things change for her, because now it's like, I'm on a mission, it's high stakes, and I have to figure this out, otherwise we're screwed. And then from the rest of the play, it's her driving forward to just get the answers and then go, we need to fix this. So, yeah, I think that's it. It happens in a very condensed space. But I'd say that is the moment where it all changes for her. And because in the first half, we see her a lot more like Gordon, relaxed, you know, just doing what they're doing, building the relationships they're doing. And then the second half of both of them, it's that now we have to deal with the consequences of what Fred has built. And what that does to them is it sets them on a path, sets them on a mission, and she just has to push it.
Yeah, because up until then we see her as a Gordon's.
Exactly.
You know, somebody who Gordon values, but she's still somebody who's helping Gordon.
Agreed.
That's the first time we really see her go, okay, this is what she actually does.
Exactly.
You know.
And off she goes to go off and do it, basically.
A sense of outrage. Let's try to not let this happen again. How they do that is, I suppose, a political question, who you vote for and what their policies are. Looking at the very apparatus of capitalism itself, which clearly is failing. Clearly the wheels are off.
Yes.
And perhaps we need to look at another way of existing, you know, and trying to build a new society. Yeah. And that's up to every individual to do, you know, just a general night out entertainment.
Yeah. I think it's really important for people to take away that, given the context of, say, Trump, for example, and how we've really moved into populism, and we don't seem to be stopping that kind of that train of capitalism, as you say, which is not working for us as a human race. And I think people understanding that it's finite, and like that sort of the egregious accumulation of wealth and assets that Fred does, and how we've heightened that in the play, and like how big consumerism now, I think just everything sort of feeds in and really works for a modern day context, because with, you know, Instagram and TikTok and all that stuff, consumerism is huge on these platforms. And I'd really like a younger audience perhaps to take that message away. So you've got, I know, people who are like, oh, I remember this, but I'd love a younger audience to take it away and go, that didn't work, as you say, and I do need to think about this thing where I'm just acquire, grow, consume, because it's having a negative impact on us. And do you need it for a day-to-day person? Like, do you need it?
But one thing I think is quite interesting, and it's a positive thing, right, is that we see in the play one man making a colossal difference. You know, just this pasty wee guy moved the world. What if he'd moved it for good? It would have been astonishing. And what if somebody else can?
I'm getting tired and I need somewhere to begin, somewhere to begin, somewhere to begin.